UFC 300 is one of the biggest events in UFC's history, and in this video I'll be giving you my full predictions and breakdown for every single fight on the card. I hope you enjoy. To kick things off, we start with the first fight on the card, which is Deiveson Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt. I think when we look at Deiveson Figueiredo, we need to look at his fight against Rob Font. I think his power translated very well. I think he took the decision pretty easily. And he's just looking good at bantamweight overall. Rob Font is a higher level fighter than Cody Garbrandt at this point and dominated him 50-45 when they fought. I feel like Deiveson doesn't have too many holes in his game. He's a very well-rounded fighter. He's still a championship level fighter as well. He's had a million fights with Brandon Moreno. He's at the top of his game. And he's come up and he's faced someone within the top 10 with really, honestly, no issue there. Very composed when he fought Rob Font. I think when it comes to the two of them, I think it's fairly even transitionally on the ground. Cody does have pretty decent wrestling. However, I think Figueiredo does have more of a submission threat there. When it does come to Cody, though, I think Cody does have the potential speed advantage on the feet and a slight technical striking advantage as well. However, he does have a 40% strike accuracy compared to Figueiredo's 55%. And worst of all, I'd say, is that Cody absorbs about almost 4 significant strikes per minute within his fights. And that's just not good when Figueiredo has that power and Cody has a pretty well-renowned suspect chin. Cody does need to stay on the outside and try and pick Figueiredo apart at range, but it's going to be pretty hard to do so because Cody has the smaller reach. Cody has a 3 reach disadvantage there. Overall, when we're looking at going back to Figueiredo fighting Rob Font, we look at how Rob Font has a 3-inch reach advantage over Deiveson Figueiredo, and then Cody has a 3-inch disadvantage to Figueiredo. So Figueiredo is dealing with a 6-inch reach difference between both of these fights. So I can easily see Figueiredo being able to deal with that point style that Cody would probably have to utilize, because if he gets in an exchange, I think he's just getting knocked out. And as we kind of mentioned before, Glassjaw, Cody has taken significant damage since losing to TJ Dillashaw, and realistically, he just doesn't seem the same anymore. You can say that he does have momentum in the fact that he has fought. He's on a 2-fight win streak. He's beaten Brian Kelleher and Trevin Jones, but it's just not quality opponents and nowhere near the level of fight that Figueiredo is. And ultimately, I feel like if they do end up getting in a striking exchange, they get tied up, which I think is definitely going to happen. I think Figueiredo is just going to KO him. I think when they get in the striking exchange, I think Figueiredo will drop him, and then I think he'll ground and pound him out. And moving on to fight number 2, we have Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. I think when we look at Bobby Green against Jim Miller, I think we're looking at the overall striking advantage there. He's got a technical striking advantage. He's a high volume fighter. He's got about 6 strikes landed per minute. His strike speed overall is he's fast. He's definitely faster than Jim Miller. I think when it does come to the ground game, we're looking at Bobby Green. He hasn't been finished on the ground since 2009. It's been, 15 years since he's been finished on the ground. He is, however, obviously coming off a brutal KO loss to Jalen Turner, and he was finished not that long ago by Drew Dober as well. He does have fairly good slips. He's pretty evasive. However, he does tend to showboat and he leaves himself vulnerable, especially as he keeps his hands low. When it comes to Jim Miller, I think he needs to close the distance and use his clinch striking. He's got pretty good dirty boxing. I think the dirty boxing and the KO power is definitely what puts him ahead of Bobby Green in that sense. But aside from that, obviously Bobby Green does have ultimately does have the striking advantage. I mean, we saw his KO power against in his fight against Jesse Butler, just completely cleaned him up. But I just don't think that Jim Miller has the ability to get that perfect shot off against Bobby. I think Bobby's just too mobile. He's just got too much movement, too much agility. And I mean, we're looking at a 40-year-old Jim Miller here. I know Bobby is obviously old and he's coming off the KO loss, but I mean, it's still down to him stylistically and how long he's been able to do that for, how long he's been able to be such a versatile, I mean, just a very movement-oriented striker. I think especially with Jim Miller as well, I mean, when he does get in those striking exchanges, he lands less than half his strikes. He's at about a 42% strike accuracy. And I mean, Jim Miller's best chance of winning this is getting it to the ground, and he also lands less than half of his takedowns as well. He lands about 44% of his takedowns. I think overall with the result, I think that Bobby will outpoint him to a decision. But if they do end up in exchange against the cage by Miller pressuring him, I think just like Drew Dober, I can see Jim finishing him. But I think down to the point, I think that Bobby Green will take the unanimous decision win. I do think though that a younger Jim Miller would be a different story, but I ultimately think that Bobby will find his range and he will outwork him. Next fight up the card is Jessica Andrade versus Marina Rodriguez. When we are looking at Andrade, I mean, she does have the more UFC experience. She's fought the higher caliber of opponent. However, I do think she has had inconsistent performances throughout her career, especially at that top level. I think she did look good against Mackenzie Dern in her last fight, but when it comes to the stylistic matchup, Dern is not nearly as good on the feet as Marina Rodriguez is. I think her best option is getting the fight to the ground. I mean, when she's on the feet, she absorbs over 5 significant strikes per minute. I also think Marina at long range and short range her striking's just going to be an issue. Andrade does have the KO power. However, she does overcommit to a lot of her strikes, which I think will put her out of position and will allow her to be countered by someone who is technically sound like Marina Rodriguez is. When it does come to Marina Rodriguez, I mean, she's got the technical striking advantage. She's got the Muay Thai clinch work. I think she'll find success in both short range with her knees and elbows and long range with that 3-inch reach advantage. She's good at both forward pressure and distance management as well. I mean, when she fought Michelle Waterston Gomez, I mean, she was just putting on a Muay Thai clinic. She worked her knees and elbows extremely well, put a lot of damage in that fight. I think overall, when it comes to the result, I think that I honestly think that Andrade just gets picked apart at range, and her best option is her top control, really, but I think she'll just struggle to get it to that position, especially with Marina's clinch game and her get-ups. I genuinely think Marina will just take this 30-27. Next fight up the card is Jalen Turner versus Renato Moicano. I think when it comes to Jalen Turner, I mean, we're realistically just looking at his frame. I mean, he's got the height difference. He's got a 5-inch reach advantage. Good kickboxing. I mean, from his last fight with Bobby Green, obviously KO power. He lands six significant strikes per minute. I think it's just going to be a major issue for Moicano's game. Moicano is a fair bit smaller than him. He stands about 5'10", 5'11". Jalen does have a high strike absorption rate. However, it's mostly been sustained by welterweights like Luque and lengthy fighters like Dan Hooker, which Renato Moicano obviously isn't either of those. He's found most of his success against opponents that are smaller than him. And in the last 5 years, he's only lost 2 out of his 8 fights, with both being split decisions against Hooker and Gamrot. So, I mean, he has been on a bit of a roll, and honestly, either of those fights could have gone his way. When it comes to Moicano, I mean, definitely durable. I mean, he's definitely durable. I mean, we saw that against RDA. He's got good striking fundamentals, good straight strikes. He's got a good 1-2. I'd say his biggest asset in this fight is probably his significant strike defense. He's got a 61% sig strike defense. So I guess that does play into his fundamentals. He's pretty defensively sound, but obviously everyone knows his best option is getting the fight to the ground and attempting to take Jalen Turner's back. Jalen's never been finished by submission though. I don't think we've ever seen him on his back being taken, except for Dan Hooker in the second round of their fight when he was about to get the rear naked choke. And that being said, it's going to be difficult to close the distance against him. I mean, he's got very good takedown defense, and it's going to be hard for Moicano to get inside. Obviously, when Dan Hooker almost finished Jalen Turner with the rear naked choke, and then the time run out, I mean, I feel like that kind of emphasizes a point for Moicano. I mean, Moicano's best weapon literally is his rear naked chokes. He has 8 career finishes by rear naked choke. But Moicano, again, going back to on the feet, I mean, he hasn't finished anyone by strikes in his MMA career, and he secures less than half of his takedowns. And then we look at Jalen Turner, and all his wins are by finish. He does not have a single decision win. And obviously this is against people that are smaller than him, like Moicano. He's just able to utilize his range so well, and he just has the power to go along with it. Yeah, Moicano's just best option is getting the fight to the ground. I mean, Jalen is just ridiculously hard to close the distance against. Moicano definitely has the potential to get it to the ground, but I think the fight overall is just an uphill battle for him. I think overall, when we're looking at the result, I think that Jalen's reach advantage, clean boxing, and just sheer size and frame, I think it'll just be too much over the 3 rounds, and I think that he'll take the 30-27 decision. Or possibly a late finish, depending on how Moicano's chins hold up, as we mentioned before. I mean, he's got that durability there. Alright, next fight up the card, we have Sodiq Yusuff versus Diego Lopes. I think when we look at this fight, I think it's going to be closer than a lot of people think. I think Diego Lopes has a lot of hype around him. Obviously, good fighter, has a lot of momentum on his side, whereas Sodiq doesn't. I mean, he obviously had his debut against Movsar Evloev. I mean, looked very good in it. Almost caught him in an armbar and had a lot of positions where their submission was really threatening in that fight. And we've seen how good Movsar is. I mean, we saw how he fought against Arnold Allen, who just before fighting him, I mean, and Max Holloway, he was on about 11-12 fight win streak. When we look at Sodiq specifically, I mean, he does have a tight boxing guard. He's very defensively sound with his striking, especially his boxing. He does have powerful hooks as well. We saw in the first couple of rounds against Edson Barboza, when Edson pressured Sodiq, his check hooks, when they were exchanging, were very effective, and they were rocking Edson. As well as that, not only on the defensive, but I mean, when it comes to his aggression, he does have a high output. He's almost got 6 significant strikes landed per minute, so very high volume. One thing I can say is just seeing how he comes back from the Barboza fight. Obviously, he took damage in the Barboza fight, but he didn't get knocked out or anything. But it's just going to be interesting to see, I mean, coming off an injury, then going into a 5-round war, it's either he's going to feel very comfortable going into this fight or very gun shy. It's going to be interesting to see how it goes, because I can easily see him being quite deflated from having the injury to then losing in a 5-round war, which he was winning at the start. I mean, he was a hairline away from knocking Barboza out. So it's going to be interesting to see his mindset coming into this fight. I think when we look at Diego Lopes, though, I mean, there's just no doubt when it comes to submission game, he's got the advantage. Diverse, advanced, extremely aggressive submission game. I think Diego just has to get it there. When it comes to being on the feet, Diego absorbs almost 5 significant strikes per minute. He's not very defensively sound on the feet. He's got the power. He definitely does have the power, but I think in terms of his technical ability, I'm not the biggest fan of it. Yeah, his striking defense overall is fairly poor, but I think it's similar in the way to Charles Oliveira in the sense of he kind of draws his opponent in when it comes to that striking exchange so he can then jump guard. I mean, Charles doesn't really jump guard, he kind of just falls and just pulls guard, whereas Diego aggressively jumps guard. I mean, obviously his submissions from anywhere are just very, very high level. I think overall though, Diego will struggle in the striking department. I think Yusuf does a very good job of will do a very good job of countering when Diego overcommits to his strikes. I think that Yusuf will crack him. I think he'll crack Diego and then follow him down for the ground and pound. But in all honesty, this is where it's hard to pick because it's a very big what if. I think that Sadiq will follow him to the ground and go for that ground and pound. But genuinely, I think that Diego is just so advanced on the ground. I think that he'll catch him. I think Diego will pull him into his guard, will pull Sadiq into his guard, and I just think he outplays him on the ground overall. I think overall the result is just going to be that Diego has him on the ground, secures an armbar finish, and I think that's just going to be set up from the guard, or he might just get a triangle. I think if you're looking from a betting perspective, I think it's hard to pick either one of them. Like, I mean, Sadiq can easily just outstrike him, keep it on the feet for the 3 rounds and take a decision. I mean, Diego has been finished twice in his career, so he's not granite chin level like a Holloway or Vettori or Vera or anything like that. I mean, he does have a good chin, but I mean, he's still crackable. I think, yeah, going back to that betting perspective, I think if you were I probably wouldn't go with either. I'd probably actually more so secure it as betting that the fight just won't go the distance. All right, next fight up the card, we have Holly Holm versus Kayla Harrison. Yes, Kayla Harrison has actually made weight. That's going to be fascinating to see how she looks in the fight, see how drained she's going to be after making that weight, because she is not small. I think when we look at Holly Holm, though, Holly Holm does have a clear advantage in technical boxing and kickboxing. She utilizes her reach very well, or her range very well, and she does have the 3-inch reach advantage in this fight. The movement on the outside, I think she really needs to utilize that. She needs to keep Kayla away. I think she also needs to utilize those front leg side kicks she uses, especially to the body, just to see if she can wear down Kayla as much as possible. Obviously, Kayla has fought 5 rounds. I mean, she didn't really show much. There wasn't really much tell of her really slowing down in her 5-round fight in PFL. But I think that overall, like, Holly Holm has fought a higher caliber of opponent in her career. I mean, she's fought Chris Cyborg, Ronda Rousey, Amanda Nunes. Obviously, she didn't win them all, but I mean, it's still the fact that she's actually fought them. It's given her that experience. She does have good takedown defense at 79%. However, I just don't think it translates to the level of Kayla's trips and her takedowns. I mean, she's a judo Olympian, 2-time judo Olympian. I don't think she's going to be able to actively stop Kayla Harrison from getting her to the ground. And another issue is Holly Holm is at the edge of her retirement. She's 42. She's not the fighter she used to be, and her fight style, like being that striker, that rangy striker, and putting on that volume, I mean, that fight style that she has is dramatically affected by her age. She's slowing down, and I think that's just going to be a huge issue. I mean, when we're looking at that age as well, I mean, there's a 9-year age difference between the two of them. Kayla's in her prime. She's never been finished in her MMA career. And as I said before, judo Olympian as well. Basically a Ronda Rousey with just better striking and brutal ground and pound. She's shown it throughout her fights on the regional scene and through the PFL. We've seen a lot of a lot of good ground and pound from her. As I said, it's going to be interesting to see if there is a possible cardio issue with that weight cut. But if there isn't, I mean, her strength is going to translate really well moving down into that division. I think overall, when we look at the result, realistically, I don't think Holly has many options. I think she's going to get clinched and she'll get taken down. And if she blitzes in for a flurry, I think that Harrison will get the level change and just drive straight through her. I think she'll just drive straight through her, take her to the ground, and I think she'll just wear her down with ground and pound, and I think she'll just find the submission off of it in round one. I think she'll get an arm bar or possibly an arm triangle with it. I just don't see a lot of hope for Holly Holm in this matchup. Next up the fight card, we have Calvin Kattar versus Aljamain Sterling. I think this is going to be a very tight fight. It's going to be very difficult to see who's actually going to take this. It's always difficult when you have a top level fighter moving up a division for the first time and seeing how they're going to perform. I mean, everyone was very skeptical about Figueiredo against Rob Font. I think this is the same issue. That weight difference can just mean so much in a fight. So it's going to be fascinating to see how Aljamain's going to translate in this. But I mean, getting into it, we have Calvin Kattar. I mean, he has very clean stand-up advantage with his boxing. He times his punches in his exchanges very well, especially his overhand right. In his last few fights, I mean, we've seen that he's been able to time his overhand right very well. He also covers his distance very well with his 1-2. He has very good striking output as well. High volume. He gets about 5 significant strikes landed per minute, and I mean, he utilizes his forward pressure very well. I mean, it's clearly obvious, especially when we look back at that fight against Max Holloway. Yes, he got pieced up, but he's very durable. I mean, he's got a granite chin. He's up there with Vettori, Holloway, Marlon Vera in that sense. His chin is just very hard to crack. But that also does come down to the way he does roll with the punches. He's very good with his boxing. But I don't think this is something that we really have to look into that much when it comes to this matchup specifically against someone like Aljamain, who isn't really known for his striking. I mean, when it comes down to the finishing anyway, I mean, he's only ever been finished once in his career, technically. He's only been finished once by submission 16 years ago. I mean, he's got one loss by KO TKO on his record, but I mean, you know, busting your ACL against Arnold Allen is not getting TKO'd. I really don't like that they do that. I think that when we are looking at Calvin Kattar's takedown defense, I think this is an interesting point. Yes, he has 93% takedown defense. When it comes to that takedown defense, yes, it's a very good stat, but I think that stat is overvalued because, I mean, yes, he has that takedown defense, but who is it against? Pretty much most, if not all, of his high-level opposition are striking oriented. I mean, he's got Max Holloway, Josh Emmett, Andre Fili, Zabit Magomed Sharapov. I mean, they're all strikers. I just don't see that stat really living up to what it actually states. It doesn't have a lot of backing. There's not a lot of evidence there. A big issue for Calvin Kattar, obviously going back to that Arnold Allen fight, he's had a year and a half off from his ACL injury. With an ACL injury, that can definitely potentially complicate his movement and his ability to sprawl. So that's where that hindrance in his takedown defense could come in this fight as well. I think when we're looking at Aljamain Sterling, ground game advantage for sure. Renzo Gracie black belt. And I mean, Kattar just hasn't fought someone nearly as advanced in the grappling as Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain's also got age on his side. He's in that prime age range. I mean, I feel like you look at a prime age range between like 30 to 34 years old. I mean, that's just being said because we've got that 35-year-old curse I mean, that always goes around and seems to be pretty true. Aljo has amazing ground transitions. I mean, that being said, I think he just has to get it to the ground as soon as possible, especially with Kattar's composed boxing. I mean, he picks his shots well, and I think that's just going to make for quite a big issue, especially that power differential that Aljo hasn't dealt with before because of being at a lower weight class. A big thing in Kattar's game that I saw in his, some of his earlier fights is that Kattar does love to throw a flying knee. He uses a flying knee when the opposition is circling away from him. So it'll be interesting to see with Kattar's forward pressure to see if Aljo goes for that takedown, and like as Kattar's coming in, Aljo drops level changes, goes for that takedown, and seeing if Kattar can utilize that flying knee to catch him out. That's going to be interesting to see because Kattar's going to be putting on that pressure. Kattar is a very forward pressure, aggressive, moving fighter. He rarely backs up. I think when it does come to that forward pressure though, that's where Aljo actually found the most success in his second fight against Peter Yan. Yan would come in, try and take him against the cage, and then Aljo would drop for a single and then sweep Yan off his feet. Aljo in that striking department, I mean, obviously there's a difference there. He is at a disadvantage at the striking, but he does have good kicks to the body. But I think he needs to capitalize on leg kicks. He needs to capitalize on those leg kicks to restrict Kattar's boxing as much as possible, because Kattar does not check leg kicks. He just doesn't. Like, if you look back in his fights, his legs are always just there to be hit. He just doesn't, I don't know if he doesn't care. I mean, if you go back and you look at his fight against Renato Moicano chewed his legs to bits and he did not check. I honestly don't even know if he checked once. So it's going to be interesting to see if Aljo can pick up on that and utilize that, because if he can disrupt Kattar's boxing, he has an extremely good chance of taking the fight. If he can make that lead leg heavy, he has a better chance of entering on the single. If he can make that lead leg heavy, it's going to be harder for Kattar to get out of that wrestling exchange. Aljo doesn't have the tools to really threaten on the feet in terms of a finish, and it allows Kattar to push the pace more in exchanges, not being able to threaten on the feet, it allows Kattar to then focus more on stuffing Aljo's takedowns, which will make the fight very close. Big thing that surprised me in the betting odds, as you can see on the screen, is that, I mean, we're at plus 136 to minus 162. That was a pick'em a couple of days ago, which makes more sense to me. I'm surprised that it swelled that much in Aljo's favor. But that being said, when it comes to the result, I believe that the weight will translate well for Aljo, and he'll be able to find success off of Kattar pressuring forward, as we were talking about before. I believe that it will hit the ground, and it'll hit the ground, and I think that Aljo, his wrestling pedigree and that advantage there, I think he will be able to out-transition and outplay Kattar on the ground, and I think he'll drag out the decision. I think Kattar will be able to get a bit of a read on it, but I think it'll be a bit too late. I think he'll get that read on Aljo's takedowns and be able to stuff him, and he'll pick up the pace when he realizes he's behind, and I think he'll pick it up in the third, and I think he might be able to take that third round. But I honestly think that I see Aljo taking a 29-28 unanimous decision in this one. All right, moving up the card, we have Jiri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic. This fight, I think, is going to possibly be the most brutal fight on the card, bar Jalen Turner and Moicano and Holloway and Gaethje. I think it's between those three. I think this fight has the ability to be very messy, which I'll explain myself in a bit as to why that's going to be. I think when we look, first of all, at Jiri, I mean, Yuri has the KO power. He is a finishing machine. I mean, we look at how many finishes he's got. He's got 28 finishes in 29 wins. He is an absolute machine with his finishes. And I mean, that does come down to him being extremely unorthodox in his striking. As well as that, I mean, he against Rakic, he has double the amount of experience that Rakic has in the sport. He has double the amount of fights in MMA. And I mean, when we look at Yuri's last fight in terms of momentum, I got to be honest, I think that it was extremely controversial decision. I think Mark Goddard, I just don't know if he made the right decision there, honestly. I think it was definitely an early call. But that being said, when it comes to that fight that he had previously with Pereira, that gives Yuri the experience against a high-level, composed kickboxer, which Rakic is. Rakic is a very traditional, high-level, composed kickboxer. I think when we're looking at issues for Yuri, I mean, that unorthodox, the unorthodox stance, his style, his unorthodox style, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, it's very good. You can utilize that style to KO people from all different kinds of angles, but you can also get caught at all different kinds of angles. I think he needs to use the unorthodox techniques and just keep Rakic guessing. I don't think he should overcommit to the unorthodox techniques. I think he needs to feint with them and then catch Rakic out. I don't see Yuri being able to take Rakic down. I mean, Rakic has got a 90% takedown defense. He's huge. Massive legs. Very good sprawling capability. It's just going to be... Yuri would just have to use so much strength to get him down. And the last thing you want against someone as composed as Rakic is to gas yourself out. I think when we're looking at Rakic, crazy KO power. As I said, very, very good composed traditional kickboxing. I think he's huge for the division. I'm honestly, when you look at him in the cage, I'm honestly borderline surprised he actually makes that weight. He has ridiculously powerful kicks, mainly his left eye kick. I mean, he honestly sent Jimmy Manuwa to the shadow realm with that kick. That's one of the most brutal KOs. If you haven't seen it, watch that fight. It is one of the most brutal KOs you'll ever see. Rakic. I mean, he hasn't been finished since his debut fight against Charles Radke, which was about 13 years ago, and that was by guillotine. And he's never been finished by strikes, which I think is obviously Yuri's best option at having 25 KOs out of his 29 wins. I think an interesting point to make, though, in this fight is that, Rakic's best weapon is his kicks, which, with his best weapon being his kicks, we look at his last fight, which was 2 years ago against Jan Blachowicz. He did his ACL, and I think that his best weapon is technically compromised from his doing his ACL. I could see that he could be hesitant with throwing those kicks, utilizing his best weapon because of the injury he sustained. And not only that, his last fight was 2 years ago. That's a ridiculous amount of time to be off, especially coming into a fight where he is against the former champion. I think overall, as a result, I think both of their striking styles conflict with each other. And I think Yuri being so unorthodox and Rakic being so traditional as a kickboxer, I think someone will just get caught pretty easily in an exchange. I think the combination, though, of the ring rust and Rakic's best weapon possibly being compromised against the unorthodox style of Yuri will result in Yuri. I think Yuri will find the finish via a TKO. This being said, though, I think if Rakic didn't have the ACL injury and 2 years off, I would honestly probably have Rakic winning by KO. I think he would probably finish Yuri. I think he's just so composed, and I think he's a huge threat in the division. I could see him being a champion. I just think that amount of time off his best weapon potentially being compromised. I think that that's just more to say in that point, that I think that Yuri's just going to take it. But I would not blame it all if Rakic knocks him out. Yeah, I think that style being very hard to read as well, Yuri's style being extremely hard to read, is going to make that difference there. Yuri's fought aside from Pereira, he's fought very well against traditional stanced fighters like Rakic. And by that, I think that Yuri is just going to get the TKO finish. Now onto the main card. Now we are looking at Bo Nickal versus Cody Brundage. Obviously controversial for the main card. I think the UFC are deliberately just trying to annoy people with it. So when Bo wins, people will just remember him because of the card quality, and will then build up another star for the UFC massively, which then leads to profit for the company. I think when we're looking at Bo Nickal, I mean, he has advantages in all areas. I mean, especially the wrestling department, which I think erases Brundage's most confident style, being his own wrestling. I think with Bo as well, I think he's shown much improved strike accuracy and striking in general just over the time that he's been fighting in MMA. And I think that it just pretty much in all departments, I think Bo just has the advantage here. I mean, obviously, hence the ridiculous odds on this fight. This is ultimately just a layup fight for Bo Nickal and the UFC. It's just a smart business move from them. I think when we look at Cody Brundage, I mean, you can never count someone out fully. I mean, it is a fight in a cage, and it's a game of, honestly, centimeters to inches. When it comes to Brundage, I mean, he does have KO. He had a decent slam KO against a young up-and-comer in his last fight. So, I mean, you can give him a little bit of momentum there, but I mean, not really. He has faced pretty tough competition though. I mean, he faced Rodolfo Vieira, who is a submission freak, and then Oleg Jacek with his KO power. They're both pretty decent middleweights, and I mean, he has had a pretty tough run in that sense. Big issue with Cody Brundage though is his fight IQ. I mean, he just puts himself in bad positions. I mean, I don't know why anyone would pull guard against Rodolfo Vieira. He also did the same thing against Cedric Dumas as well, which got him in trouble in that fight too. He's lost 3 out of his last 5, with one of his wins being a DQ against Jacob Malkoun. He was losing that fight pretty convincingly as well. I mean, and as I said, I mean, his wrestling is his best asset, but it's just going to be useless in this matchup, in all honesty. A big one for Cody as well. I mean, he gasses himself out very quickly. I think the only way he's winning this fight is he's got to bite down on his mouthpiece and just go for a KO finish. Which, that being said though, is also made difficult because Bo Nickal has a 4-inch reach advantage over him as well. So I mean, obviously closing that distance too and not getting taken down himself is a whole nother kettle of fish for him to get through. I mean, it's extremely uphill for Cody Brundage. I think when we're looking at the result though, I think Bo will just let Cody work early in the round and get him tired. I mean, when we're talking about him gassing out, he gasses himself out. And then I think Bo will take him down, overwhelm him with strikes, and then I think he'll finish him by ground and pound in round 1 for a TKO finish. Alright, moving up the card, the big one. Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. When we look at this fight, I mean, the odds are very interesting on this one. Charles has stayed the consistent underdog, and I think he's actually grown as an underdog since this fight was announced or put on betting sites. When we'll look at Charles first, I mean, when we look at Charles, I mean, he has the superior striking, especially with how much his Muay Thai has improved over the years. He also utilizes unorthodox strikes. I mean, he has flying knees, jumping front kicks. I mean, I think utilizing these as much as possible is going to keep Arman guessing, and I think that's what he needs to do. He needs to push Arman back on the back foot. And I do think Charles has the forward pressure and the attacking arsenal to put him on the back foot. Not to mention that, I mean, Charles has fought much higher caliber of opponents than Arman Tsarukyan has. I mean, he's fought Gaethje, Poirier, Chandler, Tony Ferguson when he was good at the time. And I mean, when we're looking at the ground game, which is going to be I mean, that's going to be the crux of the fight. Where, I mean, Charles is extremely aggressive off his back. We all know this. I mean, he's got submissions from all angles, completely diverse, and he has been successful against aggressive wrestlers like Arman. He's been successful against Kevin Lee, Clay Guida. Obviously, Kevin Lee probably up there in terms of, at the time, he's probably up there at Arman's level. And I think we're looking at that underdog statistic because I think it's definitely blown out of proportion in the fact of how Arman handled himself against Islam in his debut, which, don't get me wrong, it was so impressive, but it was also with Islam not being that old himself at that point in time. I think another big factor as well is how brutally Arman finished Beneil Dariush. I mean, he finished him faster than Charles did, which I think has been a bit of a sway for Arman in terms of the odds. When we look at Arman, I mean, obviously high-level wrestler. Very high-level wrestler. I mean, we've seen that. We've seen those grappling exchanges against Islam, which Islam is one of the best. I think he has the KO power in this fight. I think he has the KO power advantage. He needs to focus on setting up his power shots well, though. He needs to really focus on that, as he's just not as versatile a striker as Charles is. So trying to make sure that he can land that efficiently is going to be, I think, will be a bit of a challenge for him. Charles, however, does have an issue of taking punishment to then pull guard and have his opponents enter it, which I do think Arman could try and go for the finish. As he backs his ground game immensely. And I mean, Arman was the guy that was going on about, oh, I finished Beneil faster than Charles did. So, I mean, I think it's like that comparison of Islam notoriously going down, like knocking Charles down and then going down to the ground to finish him. And I think Arman's going to have that same mentality in the sense of, I can do this too. I'm going to go down to the ground and finish him. I back my ground game completely, just like Islam has. I think he has that mindset of competitiveness. He does have good top control. However, I mean, Gamrot was able to expose holes for the scramble, which I think Charles could also capitalize on. I mean, Gamrot's probably a better scrambler than Charles. But Charles, I mean, is just so slick on the ground and off his back, which I think he can just use submission threats to get that top control away from it. He can get him out of top control. Pardon me. I think Arman's key to winning is definitely solidifying the top control while maintaining awareness of Charles's submission transitions. If he can defend the submission transitions, I think there is a possibility that Arman can take the decision. However, I don't see this happening, especially throughout a full 15 minutes. I don't think he's been long enough in the game to really consistently be able to deal with that kind of aggressiveness from the bottom for 15 minutes. I just see Charles being able to capitalize at least one moment in time. I just think throughout the transitions, I think Charles will be able to capitalize on a mistake that Arman's going to make and get the submission. Honestly, I think that Arman is used to having top control and with it being his safest position, which he could utilize better against Islam, as Islam isn't aggressive off his back like Charles is. But I think just Charles offers just a plethora of problems that Arman just hasn't dealt with before. So honestly, I think I give Oliveira the submission. I think it could possibly be by an armbar. Right, moving up the card, we have Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. I mean, the people's main event. This is going to be, yeah, this is going to be an absolutely insane fight. All right, let's get into it. I think when we look at Gaethje, I mean, he's obviously, I mean, it's his natural weight division. He's got the KO power. I mean, he's got the difference there. He's got heavy leg kicks, which I think he needs to utilize to disrupt Holloway's movement. They're both ridiculously high output strike fighters. I mean, seven significant strikes per minute each. I think that he has very good momentum against dangerous fighters. I mean, when we look at his fighting style against his fights against Fiziev and Poirier as of recently, I mean, he's got that momentum regardless, but it's against these dangerous strikers like Max Holloway. He's been a lot more composed recently, which he's been finding his success in, and I think that's going to play well in terms of not overextending, because I mean, Holloway is an extremely good counter striker. I think that if Gaethje can make sure that he does not overextend himself, and he can maintain this composure while also utilizing this power, I mean, it's going to be ugly. As I said, I mean, Gaethje just needs to be careful he just doesn't overextend. I mean, Holloway is very good at switching his stance mid-combination to use powerful strikes more effectively. You can see it in literally any of his fights. When we look at Holloway, I mean, from what we've seen, I think the weight translation's looking good. Made weighed in heavier than Gaethje. He doesn't look drawn out at all. He looks quite filled out. It looks like it went pretty well. I mean, obviously, we're not going to be able to tell until we actually get into the fight. But regardless, I mean, Holloway has a very good gas tank, which was shown against Poirier. I mean, this is the fight. The Poirier fight is obviously the fight we're going to be comparing to. I mean, it's the lightweight fight against an opponent of similar pedigree. Yeah, he's shown that good gas tank against Poirier. Obviously, his featherweight fights as well. He works the distance very well. Has the cleaner boxing as well, and his counter striking and his exchanges is world class. However, I think Holloway just has to use his footwork to circle away. He just doesn't want to get into a trade with Gaethje, because, I mean, Gaethje's just going to throw the kitchen sink at him, especially after Dana's just announced the $300K bonus incentive. I mean, I think a lot of these fights are truly going to get elevated more in terms of their desperation to get the finish, which is, again, a smart move by the UFC. I think they should have done it a long time ago for more events, to be honest. I think that the last time Max fought at lightweight against Poirier, he was stung multiple times in that fight, especially through the opening round. It was probably about 4 or 5 times he was stung, and it was also going through the second round as well. And that was because Holloway was getting over aggressive himself. So realistically, for both of these fighters, I mean, they want to actually be keeping this at more at range, more of a point fighting actual fight. I mean, obviously it's not going to happen, but I mean, that's more their best case success, because Holloway has the counter striking for Gaethje when he comes in, and Gaethje has the power when Holloway comes in. It's going to be an insane fight, but I think when we're looking at the results, I think that pride just gets the best of both of them, and I just don't think they utilize a ground game at all. I think both of them have around about a 25% success rate in actually securing their takedowns. Both of them have got good takedown defense as well. I think that honestly, I think as a result, I think that Gaethje clips Holloway in an exchange. I think that Holloway will drop him, and I think that he'll get a ground and pound TKO finish after sustaining a lot of damage throughout the first 2 rounds. I think the finish will come in either round 3 or round 4. I truly do think so, which is sad to think, but I think that's that Holloway could drop, but I think that's just what it's going to be. Right, moving on, we have the strawweight title fight, the co-main event. We have Zhang Weili versus Yang Jianan. I think in this fight, when we look at the stats, I mean, Weili is very well-rounded. I mean, she has a dangerous ground game in this matchup specifically. Yan is more of a pure kickboxer. Weili's fought much higher caliber of opponents across her career as well. I mean, taking away from the Rose Namajunas fight, I mean, she's now at flyweight. She's been completely dominant throughout her whole career. I mean, she only lost fights at the very start of her career. She's also got the championship round experience as well. From their careers, Jan has only had one 5-round fight against Mackenzie Dern. I think when we're looking at Yan Xiaonan, I mean, she has a powerful straight. Her straight is very good. Her two, which Weili on the feet, I just honestly don't think she can be careless, because I think that Jan does have that bit of a KO power advantage. Very nice leg kicks. She utilized them well against Andrade. And I mean, speaking of Andrade, the recent success, I mean, she destroyed Andrade with a check hook. It really showed us that she's got that KO power in her locker. Yeah, overall, she's a good pure kickboxer. And I think her most likely way of winning is by drawing Weili into exchanging on the feet and countering her effectively. Both are in their prime. Weili's has the better striking accuracy and the output over Jan, but Jan is more defensively sound on the feet, and she has better KO power as well. I think Weili just overtakes the fight with her grappling though. Seeing the way Esparza was able to control Jan, and then how dominant Weili was against Esparza, shows the levels in the grappling department. I think when we also look at that Esparza fight, she just looks like a fish out of water. I think she just doesn't have she has poor get-ups. She just can't get out of that exchange. I honestly think once Weili has her down, I think she'll just get drowned. And I think, honestly, with that, I think Weili gets her down and I think locks up a submission with a round 2 armbar, or even maybe a ground and pound TKO. Alright, now onto the main event of the evening. We have Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill for the light heavyweight championship. I think when it comes to the result of this fight, I think regardless, this fight probably is not going past the 3rd round. I think it's going to end by a KO, and I think it's going to be pretty brutal. It's understandable as to why. I mean, you look at both their records, both of them are finishers, both of them have ridiculous KO power and love the stand-up. It completely makes sense why the UFC made it as the main event, because they want to go out with a bang, and we're most likely going to get a finish from this fight. I think when it comes to Alex Pereira, when we look at him statistically, I mean, he's an elite kickboxer. He's got very good striking accuracy, over 60%. He's got superior technical striking compared to Jamal Hill. He doesn't telegraph his leg kicks at all as well. I mean, we've seen how much damage that's done to Israel Adesanya, Jan Blachowicz, Yuri Prohaska. I think literally within about 2 kicks, Yuri's leg was purple. Obviously, as I said, both have the KO power there. Pereira also, though, he has the analytical / training edge because of Glover. Glover Teixeira has fought Jamal Hill in his retirement fight in Brazil. So he'll get a bit of assistance in terms of what Jamal is like actually in the cage, like what it's like to go 5 rounds against him. And it's good because it's the same environment, it's the same experience, in the sense of Alex Pereira is fighting Jamal Hill for the light heavyweight title, which is 5 rounds, and Glover did the exact same thing. So it'd be interesting to see what Glover says about his pacing, what he tried to utilize, what looks he was giving. I think that's going to be very beneficial for Alex Pereira. When we look at Jamal, I mean, obviously he's got the KO power, but when it comes to, obviously they've both got the KO power, but the difference is Jamal puts himself in more danger to get the KO itself, because he covers he basically lunges in with his strikes to attempt to get the KO. We've seen that in multiple fights that he's had before. I mean, we've looked at that with when he fought Glover, when he fought Johnny Walker. I mean, obviously it does the damage, it does it well, but those fighters are not nearly as technical on the feet as Alex Pereira. So yeah, he does have his lunging strikes. That can be an issue in terms of counter striking if he overextends and gets off balance, but it also allows him to cover distance well. Jamal also against Glover, I mean, he was able to sneak his head kicks in very well, which I think in this fight can be beneficial because Pereira doesn't utilize a lot of head movement. He's very straight up and he's quite immobile. He doesn't have a lot of agility. That can possibly be something that he could utilize. But when it comes to mobility and agility, Jamal Hill might not be as agile himself because, I mean, when we look back through this card with Calvin Kattar, Alexander Rakic, being compromised. Jamal Hill's just come back from an Achilles injury, which can definitely affect his ability, his movement ability, his agility. I think Jamal needs that agility in this fight. He needs to have a lot of movement. Otherwise, I feel like Pereira can really start popping off. That being said though, when it comes to Jamal covering his distance, I think if he is able to pressure Pereira against the cage, I think that he can KO Pereira. He just has to not let Pereira circle out, which Yuri was doing the exact same thing, but Yuri let Pereira circle out. Yuri had Pereira in a lot of trouble like early into the second round of their fight, but he allowed Pereira to circle out. I think when we're looking at Pereira's leg kicks, Hill has a very wide stance. He utilizes that wide stance to set up his left hand. His left hand is his best weapon, but when he has that wide stance and he lowers his base, he can generate more power, but that means he's putting more weight on his lead leg and he's leaving it open for Pereira's leg kicks. And I think the last thing that Jamal wants is to have to switch stance when he doesn't want to. Because in prior fights, I believe it was the Santos fight, he was switching stance. And when he switched from southpaw to orthodox, he is a southpaw, he switched straight back. Like, I just don't know. I'm not entirely sure how comfortable he is in that position. And if he doesn't have a choice to it against a striker that is so technical, I think it can play a really big issue. It will be a really big issue. I mean, it's definitely going to be on the feet. I mean, both of them haven't shown any ground game throughout their careers. I mean, we haven't really seen anything from either of them. And I mean, both of them just carry so much power through those 25 minutes. I mean, like, I just don't think no way it's gonna go to a decision. And again, I think it comes back to the incentive part when it's like what I was talking about with Gaethje and Holloway. I mean, $300,000. I mean, if they weren't already trying to knock each other's heads off, I mean, this is just going to incentivize it more, which cuts down the likelihood of them utilizing a ground game. I think overall with the result, I feel like Alex Pereira will force Hill to change stance with those leg kicks. Jamal will be uncomfortable in that position, and then I think Jamal will come in, lunge in, and then I think Pereira will catch him with that classic check hook. And after Hill lunges in and overcommits, Pereira, once Pereira knocks him with the check hook, I think he follows him down for the ground and pound, and then I think he gets the KO finish from the ground and pound. Alright, now with the fight predictions out of the way, we'll get into the fight card awards and the predictions for the biggest moments of the fight card. So starting off, we're just going to be looking at the fight of the night. I think with the fight of the night, it's pretty safe to say it's just going to be Gaethje versus Holloway. I mean, I think it comes down to the way that both of them fight. I mean, it's basically a no-brainer to me. Even if there somehow isn't a knockout, I think just the sheer output from both of the fighters will just get them fight of the night anyway. I think it's just the people's main event. I just think stylistically, it's just the way it's going to go. Now we're just going to be looking at performance of the night. I think when it comes to performance of the night, I think I've got Deiveson Figueiredo. I think just the difference between the two of them across the whole fight card, I think this is possibly the most one-sided one I could probably see. I just genuinely think Davison will brutally finish Cody. I think it's probably the safest pick among the card, and in that Figueiredo's power and range, and his range of recent opponents as of late compared to Cody's just doesn't give Cody a great chance, in all honesty. Moving on, the fighter to watch in this fight card, I think I'm going to go with Jalen Turner. I think when it comes to Jalen, I think he just has the opportunity there in the fight, because Moicano just takes so much damage. I think he's just going to take so much damage, and he relies on his durability. And I think when it just comes to Jalen's sheer power and his size, I just think if Moicano's durability is to hold up, I think the fight is just going to be made so messy. And I think if Jalen gets that dominant win, it's just going to increase his stock. I mean, he's already been put on notice from that brutal KO of Bobby Green, and he's entering the top 10. I think that with a win here on this card, he's going to be moving up pretty high up the ranks. Next up, we have the underdog of the night. I mean, again, I think this one's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's just got to be Charles Oliveira. When we look at Charles, I mean, it's just pretty insane odds on him. He's almost 3-1 underdog. For someone who's so experienced, fought the higher caliber of opponents. I mean, Arman's definitely good, but I think he's still young in the game, obviously compared to Charles. And I mean, it's not exactly a safe bet, but I think that if there's any money to be won, it's going to be on Charles at those kind of odds. Next up, I mean, upset and shock of the night. Hate to say it, but I think Holloway's getting dropped, and I think he's going to get finished in the fight. I think the way they're going to fight, and I think the power that Gaethje brings, and the momentum that he has at the moment, I feel like it might be time. Next up, finish of the night. Finally, I feel like, I mean, stylistically as well, I just feel like it's going to be Alex Pereira. I feel like, well, I mean, the fight's getting finished regardless, and I just think that Alex will just close the show with something pretty brutal. I really hope you've enjoyed the video and that you enjoy UFC 300 as well. Feel free to like and subscribe for more MMA content.